People romanticize coming home. They think it's supposed to feel like victorious, like life finally starts making sense again. But for a lot of veterans, coming home feels more confusing than the day that you left. Because nobody prepares you for what happens after all of that structure finally disappears. Nobody prepares you for the loneliness, the identity crisis, the feeling that you no longer fit anywhere. When I came back home from the Army, I didn't come home to stability. I came home to survival mode. When I got back to Ohio after leaving the military, I moved back in with a friend that I had stayed with before basic training. But things had changed this go around. He had moved into a smaller apartment, and another person was living there already. And there wasn't really that much space for me. So for around 9 months, I slept on a mat on the floor. Not a bed, not an air mattress, a sleeping mat. 3 grown adults living inside a 1-bedroom apartment. And honestly, at the time, I tried convincing myself it was temporary, that I was grinding, that I was rebuilding, but inside, I felt stuck. Every morning, I'd wake up exhausted, go work long shifts at a local steakhouse, come home tired, sleep on the floor, and then repeat the cycle. And over time, that kind of environment starts wearing on your mental state, especially after coming home from the military, where everything had a sense of structure and a sense of purpose to it. And for once, I started honestly feeling embarrassed about my life, like somehow I had failed. One thing I wish more people understood about veterans is sometimes the hardest part isn't deployment. Sometimes it's transition. Because when you leave the military, you lose more than just a job. Like I've mentioned before, you lose structure, you lose routine, you lose brotherhood, and you lose identity. And for years, your purpose is crystal clear. And then suddenly, you're thrown back into civilian life, expected to figure everything out overnight. And if you've already struggled emotionally before the service, that transition can magnify everything. At least that's what happened to me. I didn't really know who I was outside the Army. And when you don't know who you are, you start searching everywhere else for your identity. Relationships, money, work, partying, attention. Anything that temporarily fills that emptiness. And eventually, the situation at the apartment started getting to me. Arguments became more common. Tension kept... You could honestly feel the attention in the apartment. Let's just put it that way. And honestly, I was tired. Not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. I was tired of feeling like I had no direction. I was tired of feeling like I was surviving instead of building. And one morning, before work, something inside me had snapped. I packed everything I owned into my car, all my clothes, belongings, everything. Then I drove to work like normal. But during my shift, I started messaging old friends looking for somewhere else to go. That moment taught me something important. Sometimes survival mode makes people stay in situations far longer than they should. Not because they're weak, but because uncertainty is terrifying. And at that point in my life, I was terrified of instability, even though I was already unstable. Eventually, one of my old drinking friends offered me room at his place. He lived with his girlfriend, had an extra room, and said I could stay there. So I moved in. And at first it felt like freedom. It was a new environment, new job opportunities, a fresh start. I started working at a pizza place and a bar and started driving around for lifts on the side. And then COVID hit, and everything changed. The partying got heavier, people were constantly coming over, and alcohol was everywhere. Chaos was everywhere. And because I was lonely internally, I started participating more and more. And that's the thing about loneliness. People will surround themselves with noise just to avoid sitting alone with themselves. And that house was full of noise. Music, alcohol, people, distractions. And internally, I was just getting more depressed. Because eventually, the partying was no longer exciting. It just felt empty. And I remember one night during that period, I hit a really low point emotionally. I felt really lost, I felt really depressed, and I felt really directionless. And for the first time in a while, I dropped to my knees and prayed. I asked God for guidance. I asked Him to send somebody into my life that would help me continue forward until I was ready to stand fully on my own. And looking back now, that prayer became a turning point. Because one thing that I have learned is when you ask God for direction, answers often arrive in unexpected ways. But so do temptations. And sometimes both of them show up at the same time. If I could go back and talk to that version of myself, the guy sleeping on floors, drinking heavily, feeling abandoned, and trying to rebuild after the military, I'd tell him this. You're not behind in life. You're just wounded. And there is a difference in that, my friend. Because wounded people can heal, but only if they stop pretending they're okay. And that season of my life taught me something extremely painful. You can surround yourself with people every weekend and still feel completely alone on the inside. And in the next part of this story, I'm going to talk about the relationship that entered my life right after that prayer and how it changed everything.